right, I believe we are live this evening. Thanks to everyone that comes out. Thanks to you who view the streams. We are in the book of Esther. The book of Esther. We are in chapter 2. And I probably should make sure that Josh gets this post because he sometimes doesn't. All right. Here we go. Esther chapter 2, we have titled the sermon this evening, The King's Pageant. The King's Pageant. Now, I know that I've never really been a whole lot into all the different beauty pageants and things, but I do know someone that I went to school with. Her name's Ashley, and she was always real big. If I remember correctly, I think her last name is Dietz, I believe. Now I believe it's Beckham. But she would always compete in these different pageants. She would go to all the different fairs. Besides, every now and then I'll see her post. She still does it. Goes to the different beauty pageants and different things. And they try on their different dresses and all the things. Some have interviews. Some of them don't. There's all of these different things. And really the goal is to get some kind of ribbon, maybe a number one, first place, or runner-up, or maybe I think one of them is Miss Congeniality. I don't know all of the different things, but I'm sure there are people that are much more familiar with them than I am. I could tell you all about these things. But I bring all of that up to tell you that in the sermon this evening, King Ahasuerus is having a beauty pageant. Well, basically what is happening. And Esther chapter 2 in verse 1, here's what it says. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what was decreed against her. Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, let there be young virgins sought for the king. See, we find something that happens. It's an interesting thing that happens, and I think this happens in almost every relationship. King Ahasuerus has decided with his council, with his people, Memucan being one of the main ones, that they were going to banish Queen Vashti, and that she wasn't going to come before the king anymore. But it tells us that the king Ahasuerus, he remembered Vashti. And he remembered what the decree was. And you almost seem to get the idea that King Ahasuerus, his wrath was appeased, but there was something missing. There was something missing. There was something in his heart that was missing. He remembered. I think this happens really in almost any relationship that ends up for one reason or another not working out. There's a bit of the heart that's kind of in it. You've suddenly remember the person. And then next after that comes, oh wait, they're not in my life anymore. There's no way for them to be in my life. But the servants of the king, they realized what was going on. And now, I know if anyone has experienced some kind of breakup, they probably are aware of what happens. All of a sudden, you seek out the nearest people, your friends, your relatives, maybe a pastor. You're just trying to find somebody to help, support. There's a loneliness. You realize that there's a finality. There was no going back. The decree had been made. So the king's servants say, all right, let's find him another queen. All right? The servants say, it's time to play matchmaker. Now, I know that I've not done it personally, but there are many people, especially ladies, that really like to play the matchmaker role. I remember my mom and her best friend, they ended up getting my uncle with somebody, and they played matchmaker, and this happens a lot of times. And the servants said, we're going to play matchmaker, let's look everywhere. And in verse 3, here's what they say. And let the king appoint officers of all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins under Shushan the palace, to the house of women, under the custody of Higi, the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women, and let their things be for purification be given. All right, so basically, it's a beauty pageant of a sense. It says, send it all over the kingdom and look for the most beautiful girls you can find. All over the provinces, they're looking for people. And in verse 4, let the maiden which pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. And the thing pleased the queen. Pleased the king, and he did so. So now here they are. They say, let's find a new queen. King Ahasuerus, I feel like he's a little bit getting a little lonely as far as it goes. He said, let's find a new one. It sounded good to him. Let's send everywhere. Let's find somebody to be the king's wife. Verse 5, it says, now in Shushan the palace, there was a certain Jew. His name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Now, I want you to catch this, because you could get verse 5 and you could miss a lot. Something happens here, and it's this, that there's a certain Jew named Mordecai. You can almost pause the book right there for a moment, because as much as this story does revolve around Esther, it also revolves around this fella named Mordecai. Mordecai. You see, there was a plan that God was in action of, and it was being orchestrated by God. You see, there really was no real way that Mordecai would have likely been anything without Esther. And there's no real way that Esther would have ever been queen without this situation happening. You see, there would have been no reason for King Ahasuerus to ever know who Esther was. If Vashti had stayed queen, he never looks for a new queen. He never thinks about even the opportunity. And if there's not a beauty pageant of essence that's been issued, King Ahasuerus never meets Esther. She was a Jewish person, a Jewish woman. Mordecai was her uncle. Mordecai was not really anything big in the king's palace. He had a little bit of influence, but it was very little. The king barely knew who he was. At this point, anyways. But Mordecai was going to do something. He was going to have his uncle's daughter. Listen to this in verse 6. This is Mordecai we're talking about here, and we're going to talk about what he does. He says, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity, which had been carried away with Jeconiah, the king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. I want you to get this picture for a second of who Mordecai is. Mordecai has went through a very, very rough life. You say, what do you mean by that? All right, well, number one, Mordecai gets caught up in the Babylonian captivity. He gets carried away with Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Judah. So Mordecai gets all mixed up in this first thing, being carried away, going through this thing with Babylon. He's in captivity, all right? And then he's in captivity in Babylon. The next thing he knows, the Median Persian Empire, especially the Persian Empire under the Cyrus the Great, comes through. And all of a sudden, he's back in captivity. Now it's no longer with the Babylonians. He's now with the Medes and Persians. Or he's had a really rough go of it. He's been in captivity in Babylon. He's in a sort of captivity here in the Medes and Persians. He's not quite in the same boat, but not far from it. And it tells us he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther. Now, so her name really is Hadassah. We all know her as Esther, and the Bible refers to her even as Esther. After this, this is kind of the name that she had. It's his uncle's daughter. So he's brought up his uncle's daughter. Now, we don't really know exactly what's happened here, except for that something happened to her mom and dad. Because it tells us that for she had neither father nor mother. So something's happened in Esther's life. Maybe it was during the Babylonian captivity. Maybe it was during the Persians' fight against Babylon. But Esther's parents are dead. They're no longer alive. And that would be already a very impactful thing on a person's mind. All right, Esther had every reason to really feel like life was against her. Her parents were dead. She was being raised by her uncle. There's nothing in this story that says, oh, this woman should be a heroic person in history. No. If anything, she should have been a person that struggled with all kinds of things. Her parents were dead, raised by an uncle. You could easily see this person be the by-side. Probably a lot of people would be just like her in today's world. They don't really have a good family life. Maybe they've even been like Esther, raised by their uncle. Maybe their mom and dad aren't even in their lives anymore. Now here's what it says. It says, the maid was fair and beautiful. She didn't have any father or mother, but she was a very beautiful girl. It says, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So Mordecai has been raising Esther. And in verse 8, so it came to pass when the king's commandment, his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together in the Shushan, the palace, to the custody of Hegai, the Esther was brought in into the king's house, to the woman of Hegai, keeper of the woman. Now, I don't really know for sure whether or not there were different phases of this. I know we have competitions in America. You have the different ones. Maybe America's Got Talent or American Idol or anything. You can name the shows that are out there. Generally, they have different rounds and things. I kind of feel like there must have been something similar to this because I don't know how many women would have been in custody of Hegai, but I have to think that if there was 127 provinces, which we know that there were, and all the beautiful women were being selected, I have to think that they would have had to narrow it down a little bit. But in any case, somehow Esther gets into this group of people that's kind of maybe the finale of sorts. I don't know how many people were there, how many women were there, but Esther's there with them. She's with the custody of the Hegai, the keeper of the woman. It says in verse 9, and the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her her things for purification, with such things as belonged to her. Now, I want you to understand this. There's something that happens here. Hegai, he's the keeper of the woman. There was something about Esther where he really thought that she was extremely beautiful. He didn't know anything about her too much, but it says the maiden pleased him and obtained kindness of him. He speedily gave her the things. Now, if I can compare it to something that somebody would be very, very, I think, easy to get a picture of. You know, on America's Got Talent and the different talent shows, they have this thing called the golden buzzer. You know, you hit it and you're automatically to the next round or whatever. I think to the live shows, however it works. I don't know all the details. But I will tell you this, Hegai, the keeper of the woman, he essentially gave Esther the golden buzzer. She obtained him, she pleased him, she was beautiful. He realized right off the bat, this really might be the one. All right? And it says there were 7 maidens, which such things belonged to her, and 7 maidens which were meet to be given her out of the king's house. And he preferred her and her maids in the best place of the house of the woman. All right, the guy who's in charge of the keeper of woman that's supposed to be running this beauty pageant, basically, he thinks Esther's the greatest one that there is. He really does. He prefers her before all the rest of them. You see, there was something happening here. God was at work. No one else realized that. No one realized that God had already ordained that Esther should be queen. Because no one knew what was going to happen. That there was going to be a man named Haman who was going to try to destroy the Jews. Now we're getting a little bit ahead of the story and we'll get there. But I'm trying to help you to see There's something that had to happen. And God gives Esther favor in the one that's in charge of the whole beauty pageant, basically. She's given all the things that she needs. It says in verse 10, Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. So here it is. Esther is beautiful. She's got these women with her. They don't really know anything too much about her. It's amazing to me that no one really checks into the history of Esther. They really don't. They don't really check into the fact that she's a Jew. They don't check anything into her kindred. It's just like all of a sudden there was beauty, and that was everything. And that's really what this whole thing was about. The whole thing was about beauty. But you know, it's very interesting that Esther finds favor everywhere she goes. There's something about not only beauty, but a beautiful heart. And we can see that Esther really cares about things. She really cares about her uncle. She listens to what he says. She does what she can. Look at this in verse number 11. It says, and Mordecai walked every day before the court of the woman's house to know how Esther did and what should become of her. You know, Uncle Mordecai was one of the best fathers that a girl could have. He just was. He wasn't her real father, but she was kind of his adopted daughter, and he was very concerned. He wanted to know what was going on. It says he walked by the court of the woman every day. You know why? He wanted to check on Esther and make sure she was doing okay. All right, Uncle Mordecai was very concerned about what happened with his daughter. I'm going to call her daughter. You know, technically, it's his niece, but he's basically taken her on as his daughter since her parents were dead. And here he is. He's going by every day. He's checking on her. He's being a good dad. It says in verse 12, now when every maid's turn was come to go into King Ahasuerus, after that she had been 12 months according to the manner of a woman. So I want you to get this. This isn't just one short thing, you know. All right, get all the girls together, a 1 week thing, and find out who King Ahasuerus wants to know. This went on for a year. All right. Esther's had to do all these purification things. This went on for a whole year. She's been in this thing. Now, I've never known ever a beauty pageant to take a whole year, but this one did. All right, most of the time, maybe a week or so, you figure it out. Maybe a few weeks. I'm not sure how they do these things. I know they have Miss America and Miss Universe and Miss everything else. But I'm not sure how they do all these things. But I've never seen a beauty pageant take a year, but this one did. Esther's putting all these different purifications with her, all these other women with her. It says that, for so were the days of the purifications accomplished. This is Exodus chapter 2, verse 12. To wit, 6 months with oil and myrrh. So 6 months, they got oil and myrrh put on them. 6 months with sweet odors and with other things to the purifying of the woman. So here she's had all of these things to make them look beautiful, to make them smell good, all these different things. And now comes the real test, the real show, so to speak. Verse 13 says, then thus came every maiden into the king. Whatsoever she desired was given her to go with her out of the house of woman unto the king's house. So here they go. All these women are going before the king. They're taking whatever they want to, whatever props they want, whatever they want. Basically, you can have anything. Why? Because you're going before the king. You're trying to impress the king. But I find Esther's presentation to the king very interesting. Because in verse 14, it says, in the evening she went, on the morrow she returned into the second house of the woman, to the custody of Shashgaz, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubine. She came in unto the king no more, except that the king delighted her, and that she were called by name. So here they are. Now they're kind of waiting. All right, they go before the king. It's a waiting game. Is the king going to call your names? Is something going to happen, or are you just going to go back home and be the same person you were? That's the reality of it here. If Esther's name isn't called right here, she goes back home to Uncle Mordecai, never known anything about that. At one time, she was in the finalist for the king. But here's what happens. In verse 15, and this is her turn, and they mentioned in verse 14 that she went in the evening. But when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her to his daughter, was called before the king, she required nothing but what Hegai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the woman, appointed. You know what happens? Esther doesn't take in a whole lot of fancy things into coming before the king. No, she just takes what Hegai gives her. I kind of feel like Esther was a very simple woman. She'd been raised by her uncle. Didn't really have a whole lot, it doesn't seem. I know I'm kind of looking into this a little bit, but I really do feel like this is kind of what is kind of given to us. She was a very simple young girl. She was a young Jewish girl raised by her uncle. She was very simple. She didn't want anything special. She goes in before the king. And look what it says at the end of verse 15. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. You know what happens? It doesn't tell us that King Ahasuerus was like, this is the one. No, it tells us that every single person that was in this beauty pageant felt like this was the most beautiful girl in the entirety of them all. If they were giving scores, every single judge basically threw up a 10. This is the one. It was basically agreed upon by everyone. This is the woman that's the most beautiful. Why? Because God was working a plan. And God knew that Esther was going to be queen. The people really, it's amazing to me how people think that they really control everything. They do. We think we really control everything. You know, we try to set up all of our plans and set up all of the things that we're going to do with our money and come up with all these different things. And you know what happens so many times? All of a sudden, a wrench comes into our plans, a monkey wrench, so to speak. It doesn't work out the way that we thought it should. I can tell you, if you were looking at Esther's life before all of this time, you would have probably thought, there's no way anything ever think it's going to ever happen to this woman. This young girl, she's pretty. If you ask them that, yeah, she's pretty, but her mom and dad are dead. She's raised by her uncle. It's a sad story, but she's never going anywhere in life. I feel like that's how a lot of the comments would have went. If you ask people about this girl, and yet God had another plan. This girl that everyone would have thought should have been by the wayside. He had a plan. Queen Vashti was going to get banished. It was going to be a beauty pageant set up. And God was going to bring this little girl whose mom and dad were dead, who was raised by her uncle, and he was going to set her upon the queen's throne. Look what it says in Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. In verse 16, so Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus in his house royal in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. 7 years in the kingdom's reign. Here comes Esther, and now she's become the queen. And verse 17 says this. And the king loved Esther above all the women. She obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. All of a sudden, if you would have gave percentages, when Esther was born, what's the chance this girl ever becomes queen? And I think every probability person in the world would have gave you a 0%. And before Queen Vashti was banished, say, what's the chance this Jewish girl is ever going to become queen? I can tell you that it was still sitting at about 0%. No probability agent would have been willing to take on the bet. Even I have a feeling that when this beauty pageant began to be placed, wasn't too many people at first realized, oh, wait a second. This person is very beautiful until she gets to the house of the woman. Hegai would say, whoa, you might have something here. And all of a sudden, all the people say, yeah, this is the one. A year goes by, she's the one. Esther becomes the queen. She's loved by Ahasuerus, it says. Well, look at verse 18. Then the king made a great feast, and all his princes and his servants, even Esther's feast, He made release the provinces and gave gifts according to the state of the king. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat at the king's gate. Esther had not yet showed her kindred nor her people as Mordecai had chosen. For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up with him. And this is an amazing thing. God's working. It says that Esther followed Mordecai. She listened every word he said. He took into account. You know, that would be a wonderful thing for all children to do. Be to obey their parents in the Lord. For this is right. But God's working. God's working. We're going to look into it here in the next few weeks, Lord willing. We're going to see the king's pageant, or the beauty pageant. The one you would have never expected. Esther. Who would have thought zero chance to be queen. But when God's involved, things happen. I want to tell you this evening, God's still in charge. God's still working out. The king thought he was throwing his own beauty pageant. He thought he was really selecting his own. But I'm telling you, God was working things out from the very beginning. Working it out. To get Esther into a position of queen. And we're going to find out the queen that she would be. The excellent queen that God would set up to save the Jewish people. Thanks to all of you who come out. Thanks to you listening to the streams. We appreciate your support. Pray that you have a wonderful evening in the Lord. Be prayed up, blessed up, and ready to go up. Have a wonderful night.